The thing about copyright is that it's a law, and as teachers and educators, I think we think a lot more about the ethics of attribution and don't really actually know that much about the law behind it. And so I wanted to clarify which parts of what we're talking about today are really about what is codified in the law versus just what is the right thing for us to be doing and to be asking our students to do. And they should know the difference too, so we should be actively teaching this to them. So for clarification, we're gonna go through some of those things together. So the law is the copyright. Ethics is where we're talking about plagiarism and attribution. And I find it's really interesting. Teachers are super confident about teaching about plagiarism and super confident about pointing out when a student has plagiarized and asking him or her to make the adjustment and add the attribution. But when it comes to copyright, for some reason, teachers are like, well, I don't really know anything about that, and it's education, so it's fair use, I'm all good. So we need to commit to building the capacity in our colleagues to understand the difference here. We think of plagiarism as it's our ethical obligation to give credit for work done, for ideas that have been put down in printed form. And we do this by adding a bibliography or work cited to any kind of product where we use those things. So at the end of a video or at the end of a formal academic paper or maybe in the comments in a published podcast. So those are all the ways that we do that. And we're super confident with that. When it comes to copyright, though, the law part, this really has nothing to do with us as the user. It has to do with the rights of the creator. So copyright is much more about the creator than it is about us as the people who use it. So it's the legal right of the creator to determine how their original creative work will be used by others. So if you create something new that has never been created before, you have copyrights, okay? And that means, guess what? Our students have copyrights because they're always creating new and original work. So we don't want to just teach them this so that they're sort of good stewards of others' copyrights, but we want to teach them this so that they know and they're empowered to know what their rights are. If you have copyrights, then you have the ability to decide how others will use your work. That's what you have the right to do. So you have the right to decide who can make copies of your work and under what circumstances. So you can say, children can make copies of my work in order to create something new, but adults can't. Or you can decide whatever you want. There are no government guidelines about what you decide here, as long as you share it really clearly. You can decide how it can be distributed and in what forms. So you can say it cannot be distributed digitally, it can only be distributed on paper. Or you can say it cannot be distributed on paper, it can only be distributed digitally. You can decide all of that. You can decide when and how the work can be displayed or performed. So that's why in your theater programs, there are certain performances that they cannot do in schools or they can do in schools. That's a really great example of copyright. And you can decide if a derivative work can be made using parts of the work. So this is like a spin-off. So if you think of like Friends, and then they had the spin-off for Joey, right? So whoever owned the copyright for Friends had to give... No, I know, it didn't work out. So whoever decided to release that copyright spin-off, it was a bad decision. But the point is that they had to get permission from the person who owned the copyright, who created the concept of Friends, in order to make that show. You can't just do that. So it isn't just about the work itself, it's about anything that may be inspired by the work as well. So those are the 4 copyrights. So if something is protected by copyright, can we still use it without getting permission? What is that called? Fair use. Very good. You guys are so good at this. I know, so good at this. So fair use is one of those elements of the law that's a balancing test. Like the separation of church and state is another example of a legal balancing test. So it isn't like you can check boxes and know that separation of church and state has successfully been achieved. There's all these factors that you weigh, and you don't actually have to have all of the factors in order for it to be something that qualifies as fair use. You could only have 2, but those 2 could be really strong. And that could then be something that qualifies as fair use. So the 4 factors are the purpose and character of your use. So are you using it to do something new, or are you using it because you want to get credit for that idea as a part of some other thing? So you don't want to use it in a way that's going to insinuate that you should get any kind of credit for that creation. The amount and substantiality of the portion taken. So if you use a whole chapter of a book, that's probably going to be copyright infringement and will not qualify as fair use. You really need to purchase the book in order to use that whole chapter. If you use just a small quote or something, then that's okay, that's gonna be fair use. The nature of the copyrighted work. So this one is probably the weakest of the 4 factors. It's not the one that the court will focus most of their efforts on. The first 2 are probably the most important, but this is just kind of like, I don't know, what is it? Is it a recording? Is it music? Is it video? It's sort of just making sure we establish what the creation actually is. And then the final one is the effect on the potential market. So has the person retained their rights to profit from their original creation if they want those rights? That's really important. And so I like to use this graphic. This is the graphic that's in our guide from Connect Safely to really drive home the point that these are not boxes that you check. This is a balancing test. So if you if you hit 2 factors really hard, then you're probably going to get fair use. So, and my last thing that I want to say is there is no factor that mentions that if you're an educator, it's automatically fair use. Like educators aren't even mentioned in the factors. Right. So it's really, really important for us to really share that with our colleagues.